Greetings from Belgium. My name is Kurt Peleman, and I recently joined Synergos as the Europe Director of the Global Philanthropy Circle. Welcome to the second session of the second day of the Synergos Global Gathering. As you probably all know, yesterday we focused on cultivating the soul. Today we're focusing on cultivating the mind, and we had our first session just concluded, where the theme was beyond wealth, and it was already a very rich and open and authentic conversation. From beyond wealth, we now move to beyond silence and the power of storytelling in systemic change. It is now a true honor to introduce our guest speaker of today, Soma Sara. I'm not going to really do an introduction because Soma, you will share a story in a few moments. But what I can say already is that I have two daughters of 17, and over the weekend I told them a bit about your story, and they were deeply touched, impressed, and inspired. And so thank you already for inspiring my daughters, and I'm sure you will have the same impact on this audience. So Soma, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege to speak here today. Thank you for inviting me. What is rape culture? Do you really understand what it is? Do you even believe that it exists? Rape culture is when thoughts, behaviors, and attitudes in society have the effect of normalizing and trivializing sexual violence. I'd really like to take a moment just to look at the very phrase, rape culture. Because when I first used it, I actually came up against a lot of resistance. People felt uncomfortable with it. They felt unsettled. They thought I was going too far. They often felt attacked, or they got really defensive. So at the time I asked myself, why is this? Why do the very words rape culture make so many so uncomfortable? Could it be because it forces people to really look at what's going on in society? Could it be because it forces people to think about things that they've never thought about before? It is difficult to accept that we are all complicit in this culture. Yes, we don't like it, and yet we're a part of it. That's where the problem with the word rape culture lies. Rape. It sounds so extreme, and yet we're all complicit in something so extreme and unacceptable. Dehumanization is at the heart of this culture. When we strip a person of their humanity, they become vulnerable to violation. This is an incremental culture where everything is interconnected. And this isn't just about the individual perpetrators. This is about a systemic social problem with deep roots in patriarchal belief systems and ideologies about power, gender, entitlement, and male dominance. The misogyny and the sexist attitudes that exist at the fabric of society feed into the structures that systematically fail survivors. The victim blaming, the slut shaming, the coercion, the catcalling, the rape jokes, the non-consensual sharing of intimate photos, the upskirting, the unwanted groping. You know exactly what I mean. These dehumanizing behaviors inform a culture where sexual violence can exist and thrive without consequences. With over 42,610 testimonies on the Everyone's Invited website, we know that very sadly, rape culture exists. It's real. Yes, I am complicit in this culture. Yes, you are complicit in this culture. So what is Everyone's Invited? In short, it's a place for survivors to share their stories. Our mission is to expose and eradicate rape culture with empathy, compassion, and understanding. And my own experiences of this culture began in my early teenage years. And it was the conversations with my friends throughout my time at school and university that began to reveal to me just how widespread and prevalent this issue is. I believe that the London I grew up in was characterized by an endemic rape culture that had a severe impact on my mental health, my confidence, and my relationships. And while finishing my English degree at UCL, at the beginning of the first lockdown, and also after having many conversations with friends about this issue, I was sitting on my kitchen table one day and I decided I'm going to share these stories. So I posted them on my Instagram and I was immediately overwhelmed with messages from old friends, new friends, friends of friends, people who I hadn't seen in 5 years, and complete strangers all reaching out to me to tell me how much they resonated with everything I was saying about this culture, and who also began sharing their own stories of harassment, abuse, assault, and rape. And with their permission, I shared those stories, and it really just snowballed from there. And the more stories I shared, the more I actually received. And it was distressing to understand and to come to terms with the true scale of this problem. But it was so real for me because I knew so many of the people sharing their stories, their most vulnerable moments. It was so moving. It was probably the most significant moment of my life, realizing that I wasn't alone in my experience, and gaining strength from the incredible individuals who shared this trauma and understanding. So I felt compelled to create Everyone's Invited a year ago for survivors to share their stories. I'm so often asked why Everyone's Invited has inspired such a powerful conversation with so many people. But I'd really like to make it real for all of you today, as I'm so grateful that you came here to listen. I'd really like everyone to just close their eyes just for a moment. I really want everyone to just imagine something in your life that you're embarrassed about, that you're ashamed about, that you wish hadn't happened, that you wish you could go back and erase, but it's still in your mind. It could be something small, it could be something big, something you regret. It could be something you did to a friend, your parents, or it could be something that was done to you. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, I want you to just take this moment to imagine it. And then if you could think about it. Maybe you've never shared it with anyone. And all of a sudden, you're given a place to share it anonymously. That's what I did with Everyone's Invited. That's really all I did. I shared my story, and then I said, if you want to share your story anonymously, you can. And that act of sharing resonated with so many people. And in that affirmation came a confirmation that rape culture exists and is prevalent, but also that there is a need for Everyone's Invited as a place for people to freely share without the fear of shame or judgment. Over the course of this campaign, many people have asked me to share my own story. I'm often asked questions like, why you? Why did your story start this conversation? What was it about your story that was unique? But that's just it. My story isn't unique. It's relatable. It's a reality that so many of us know. A reality that we've shrugged or laughed off, kept hidden, and learned how to just cope with. All I did was share my story. And it's the biggest obstacle that I faced so far, finding the strength to share my story. And it was a voice that came from within. And it was courage that I found beyond the guilt, the shame, the anger, the vulnerability, the therapy, the panic attacks, and the love from others that patched me back together. Sharing my story helped others see that they were not alone in their experiences. And people took strength in this. It empowered them to share. And what began as a small moment of sharing for myself spiraled into a powerful chorus of voices that could no longer be overlooked. There is so much power in a story, and the testimonies are extraordinary proof of that. The testimonies of the many survivors who have shared their experiences are driving this movement. Those who have been suffering in silence are rising up through Everyone's Invited, and it is the privilege of a lifetime to amplify their voices. We must listen to survivors. We must believe survivors. We as a society have been failing survivors of sexual violence since the beginning of time. Ancient concepts of rape involved the theft of a woman's chastity, which was the property of their male relatives. Victim blaming is an archaic phenomenon, and early modern authorities equated rape and adultery and punished rape with adultery and punished the victims for sexual immorality. We have been living in a culture that shames victims for their experiences, a culture that isolates, ignores, and ostracizes survivors when they speak out about their trauma and their most vulnerable moments. Male survivors are even more stigmatized. 26 years is the average length of time it takes for men to disclose details about their experiences of sexual violence. LGBTQ+ individuals face a threat of sexual violence at disproportionate rates. And we must highlight the importance of intersectionality in a rape culture and how different forms of discrimination, whether that be sexism, racism, or classism, combine, overlap, and intersect, especially in the experiences of marginalized individuals or groups. So, what next? Another question I'm asked repeatedly. What will you do next? What's next for the campaign? How can you fix this? What's the solution? And the truth is, I'm only 22 with a BA in English Lit. I think it's obvious that I don't know all the answers. but I do know that there is value in moments of strength. Little moments of bravery in our everyday lives do have an impact. If you witness misogyny, if you see someone being mistreated, have the courage to call it out and stand up for the victim. Disrupt these deeply entrenched patterns of abuse. You have no idea how much one action or one conversation can do to transform a culture. So let's have the courage to stand up for those who don't have the strength, the language, and the confidence to stand up for themselves. But let's do this with empathy and understanding. So how did we get here? Who's to blame? What's to blame? And why do we place such an emphasis on blame? Why do we blame individuals and institutions for a cultural problem that we are all a part of? Instead of investing our energy in blaming others, why don't we take responsibility for a culture that we are all complicit in sustaining? We are all the products of our environments where misogyny and harassment is normalized, where abusers are excused and not held accountable for their actions, where sexual violence is glamorized in TV and films, where victims are not believed. Rape myths like the notion that false accusations are commonplace and that women are liars, or that because there was alcohol involved, it was unintentional, or that she brought it on herself because of what she was wearing or how much she was drinking. These myths dominate the prevailing social norms and exonerate abusers and rapists. Rape is a choice, not a mistake. These are the words of a leading academic in the area of positive bystander intervention. And when she told me that rape is a choice, not a mistake, it made me stop and think. The words really stuck with me, so I wanted to share them with you today. Rape is a choice, not a mistake. In talking further to this academic, they taught me about being an active bystander, which is an area I've always been interested in because I do believe that it could be one of the ways that can help eradicate this culture. It sounds so easy to be an active bystander, but let me tell you from my personal experience, it's actually not. I don't usually share anything really personal about myself, but I really thought that I would today. When I was about 17, I went to Berlin with a group of my best friends, and we had the most amazing time. We had so much fun, and we always wore what we wanted. We went out, and despite how much fun we were having, we were actually harassed on the street almost every single day and every single night that we were there. And at the time, I rather foolishly, when this would happen, my friends and I would shout back. And one night we actually went out, and again, a group of older men across the street started shouting at us, really lewd, inappropriate sexual comments. And we immediately, in my 17-year-old self, shouted back again. And they got really aggressive, and they actually bottled us. And there was glass shattering everywhere, and there was glass that went into my leg and a bit of blood. And in hindsight, this was obviously a really foolish way to react. We shouldn't have shouted back at strangers and put ourselves in danger. Being an active bystander seems so easy but let me tell you, it's actually a lot harder than you might think. You have to notice the event, like a sexist remark or an unwanted grope, recognize it as problematic, and then be motivated to assume responsibility for helping, and then possess the skills to safely and effectively intervene. I really hope that in talking to you today, and that when you leave here, you might be motivated to want to do something. But you also have to know the people, and definitely don't do this with strangers like I did as a 17-year-old in Berlin. It's all about having the courage to intervene and stand up for what you feel is right. It's not easy, it's socially uncomfortable, and silence is the easy way out. If we can all take a moment of self-reflection and ask ourselves, is this who we are? Is this who we want to be? Does it feel wrong? If it does, then it probably is. Call it out. Thank you so much for listening to me today, but before I finish, I wanted to share with you what Everyone's Invited has already achieved. We've had well over 2,000 pieces of media coverage from all around the world, which means that we have ignited a global conversation around rape culture. Everyone's Invited has been a catalyst to the UK government. We've provoked an immediate response from them and an Ofsted review in schools. And I quote from Ofsted, "The review was announced by the government on 31st of March after anonymous testimonials of sexual abuse were published on the website Everyone's Invited. This review will seek to find out whether schools and colleges have appropriate safeguarding measures in place and consider whether current guidance is understood by schools and colleges, and whether it is sufficient to help them respond effectively to allegations. The findings of the review, which were announced last week, confirmed the work of Everyone's Invited. They reinforce what we've said from the beginning. Rape culture is everywhere, including in all schools. We are encouraged that the report concluded that sexual harassment and online sexual abuse is happening in all schools. And even if there are no specific reports of abuse, action must be taken to address this problem. We have also prompted new guidelines from the Office for Students, the university's regulator, which they've published. Everyone's Invited has also provoked the launch of the NSPCC helpline for survivors. And we are currently working with the Department for Education, the Home Office, and the police. This hasn't happened because of me. It's because of the 42,610 testimonies that change is happening. When I'm asked what's going to happen in the future, the focus will be taken off the individual institutions and will shift onto the culture. In fact, it will actually shift onto you. Thank you.